Hello, hello, all, and welcome back to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. Now, last week we had started the Claptrap's Robot Revolution DLC for the original Borderlands and got through about half of it, actually. It was a pretty productive day. Today we are going to be tackling the other half of it. Originally, I was expecting that this would be a three-part mini-series, so to speak, but unfortunately, I burned through things a lot faster than I had expected, and I suppose my drive to get it done quickly kind of, it sped up the end results. So, the result of that is welcome to the finale of the Borderlands 1 Deathless Challenge. And I'll be honest, this has been both harder and easier than I had expected. And I don't necessarily feel that this is something that I can easily talk about. There are highs and lows in any challenge. There are moments that make the entire game more difficult, and there are some challenges that are all about perseverance. So, Borderlands 1 had. How do I put this? It is the only challenge on this channel that I have failed on numerous occasions. I started it well before I started this channel in and of itself, way back in the day. And my final, I guess, 5 attempts at it have all been on camera. And truth be told, those last 5 attempts, each one got farther than the one before it. Each attempt was meant to be more than the last, learning from my mistakes in ways that I hadn't done so just casually trying this challenge. And so it is both a blessing and a curse in a way. I am, how do I put this? Sentimental that this is the finale of this challenge because of how much time, effort, and energy went into this over the past, 3 years. Um, so welcome, the finale of Borderlands 1's Deathless Challenge. Now, today we're separating it into two halves. The first is going to be the time it takes to get to the next major boss and defeat them and collect the wired device. This wireless integrated something or another device is meant to reprogram Claptrap back to factory settings. That's pretty much all it ends up being and doing. Without it, the Operation Claptrap Trap um, is, well, it's a bust. So that's where we're starting, is tackling this at the fundamentals. The early part of this DLC, I think my favorite basic detail of this DLC in and of itself as a whole is that it tries to encompass everything that has been built up to this point in the game. You're dealing with, well, monsters that have been corrupted by Claptrap, ranging from the Rack to the Spider Rants to the Skags to the Bandits, but is also throwing in bits and pieces from throughout the duration of the game as a whole in the form of various bosses, like the Rack Hive at the bottom of the cavern here, is a mini boss in one of the side missions. So you get a little bit of both worlds thrown at you in this one. And I have to say that that's kind of a really unique approach to this game as a whole, given that every single enemy you have faced has had some prior experience with, all except for one. Now, the one enemy I'm of course talking about is the next major boss. That boss is none other than the Atlas Corporation's very own Commandant Steel. Now, Commandant Steel is, well, it fights a lot like the assassins from the Atlas DLC, but I suppose the context is slightly different. She has no grudge against you aside from turning her into a donut in the end of the first of the main game. So she doesn't really have as much of a impact as the other bosses do. Dealing with Dr. Ned Trap is, I suppose, a return to form. It both has referenced the initial battle with Dr. Ned, as well as the mutated zombie Ned as well. And of course, you have a rematch with the oh, what's his name? The final boss of General Knox's DLC, General Knox himself, or General Knox Trap. The entire point being that each of these bosses has had some prior engagement with you. Each enemy has had a prior engagement with you. And so this more or less ends up being both a return to form, but also a much needed approach to the game as a whole. It's showing where you've been and how far you've come. This is something that I find comes up a lot in video games as a whole. That enemies from early in the game will come back to haunt you later and be simple, basic opponents that you are supposed to find easy. So, why is it so different here? Well, I think part of it is that a lot of the other approaches to this kind of feel shoehorned in at times. And I'll be honest, this one's just as shoehorned, just as MacGuffin-y as prior attempts to do this. But it's done so in a way that I think treats the player with respect. It says, yeah, this world is wild, wacky, and zany, and every single living creature on Pandora is susceptible to claptrap's technology, shall we say. From the spider ants to the racks to even the rack hives, everything is susceptible to this technology. So it makes sense to a degree. But you learn early on that not only is it strong enough to control the living, it is also capable of bringing back the dead. And so you end up with rematches with multiple opponents throughout the game. Now, this isn't necessarily a new topic, I suppose. It's something that's been brought up and done multiple times throughout the game at this point. But it is something that is given a little bit further development. And so, in that regard, a lot of the enemies that you're facing off with are getting more development, more interesting information thrown at you. And I gotta say, that is something that I personally like about this DLC as a whole. It not only features a somewhat comical villain, but it also features both villains of past and present.
The key words. Soldier, get your team ready to go inside while I finish off. Wait. Where am I? What happened to the vault? Why is this hole here?
Yeah, she definitely felt a little empty after their prior time we met her. But what I'm getting at is it's so much more than just fan service at this point. It's a journey down memory lane, the final DLC that they decided to make for this game. And I think it's done pretty well, all things considered. Claptrap is far from the weakest opponent you're going to face throughout the entire game as a whole. You get to actually face off against Commandant Steele, and every single one of the enemies that you come across, past, present, are back for rematches, ready to show off and actually, you know, duke it out with you. And so, this, I say it is an introduction to what Borderlands becomes. But it's really much more than that. It's both an introduction and, how do I put this? Yeah, it brings so much more. It treats every encounter as if it could both be your last and the first of many. And this is something that I don't think gets done well in many games. While some have a habit, a penchant for showing off, there are some enemies that are reoccurring in gaming, some that are consistent. I'm going to turn to Nintendo's Ganondorf. He shows up constantly. In almost every single game, he is tangentially related to the plot in some capacity, even in the games where he was never intended to be there at all. As a result, Ganondorf has become kind of synonymous with coming back from the brink on a regular basis. And so, most of the time, they don't really give much of a reason behind this. Just, oh, yeah, it's Ganondorf. He is the legendary pig man. He is going to destroy the world yet again, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Wahahaha. But in the reality of it, there is often some very thin reasonings behind why the character comes back so often. But this, it feels much more fleshed out. It feels much more rewarding, knowing that your opponents came back because of A, B, C, and D. Knowing not just the what, the how, but the why. And so, I gotta say that that was done very well by the developers here. And it leaves rather a decent. This is probably one of the best DLC as far as the main story goes. It is unfortunate then that it has to end. So, with everything said and done, I want to take a little brief trip down memory lane here. Borderlands 1 starts from humble beginnings. Every single character that you can play as has the goal of treasure, of power, of really just strength in general. And the entire game is predicated on this belief that eventually you can get anything accomplished if you give it enough time, if you put your mind to it. And so, Borderlands 1 treats every enemy with that kind of, I want to say, fairly thin but understandable motivations. With the first couple of enemies being characters like Nine Toes, Bonehead, and Sledge, as well as, what is it, Sledge's bodyguard? Every single one of them had a reason to be where they were when they were, without too much fanfare. By the end of the first arc, after defeating Sledge, the game kind of slows down. It lets you take the game at your own pace. That is something that comes up to a degree, but you end up fighting many more minor bosses, enemies that are not intended to be major opponents, that are meant to showcase minor changes at most. And so, the bosses from the second half of the game kind of have less to do with the main story as a whole. Characters like Crom, he exists at the top of the food chain of the local wildlife, the local political structure, if you will. The local bandits, they're all under his control, and he has yet another piece of the key. And Crom shows yet another aspect of it, that his, shall we say, local militia, his local generals, are each strong enough to handle their own. Characters like Reaver, One-Eyed Jack, um, Mad Mel, all worked for him. Anywho, so there is that aspect. The final area revolving around Doll and how the beasties can have or had one of the keys. And just how everything kind of pieces together at the end with Atlas coming in to swoop in and steal the prize despite all the extra work you put in. The entire point of the game from the main story was about dismantling oppressive governments and, I suppose, groups that ruled by force. The DLC had Dr. Ned trying to deal with his zombie problem. A problem that he so generously created himself. Oh, thank you very much there. Should say that it swooped in and saved my life. Can't go wrong with that. Anywho, Dr. Ned's whole problem was one he created himself. General Knox was the leader of yet another army, another group willing to take over Pandora. The difference between Knox and, shall we say, between Atlas and other bodies that were looking to take over Pandora was that General Knox's DLC was more about him waiting for you to be ready to face him. He had less investment to Pandora and was actively just trying to get off this stinky rock. So there's a lot to say about that mentality as well, to a degree at least. But it all culminates in this. Claptrap getting new programming meant to take down the filthy vault hunters long from afar using whatever means necessary, and instead becoming a much more dangerous and much more difficult enemy to handle. This, of course, is the crux of the final section. The final area of the game is, of course, as I said, a gauntlet. Each of the prior DLC bosses, Ned, Atlas, and now as well, Commandant Steele, are all here for a final duel of sorts, ready to put their lives on the line for Claptrap. And it's kind of ridiculous, I won't lie, but ridiculous or not, it does a lot for the, I suppose, world building as a whole that Claptrap has gone to such lengths to be able to defeat you, to be able to bring back a creature that was lost in the depths of an underground tunnel. Takes serious guts, and this is also why I question the canonicity of the Jacob's Cove DLC, because it exists as part of Claptrap's rise to power in the original game. So I'm not really sure. Anywho, wow, he really got bored of making new backgrounds. He really just wants to fight me himself. Anyways, so I am planning another run of the game. One that is kind of ridiculous, I won't lie, but it is one that I think the casual audience would enjoy. Thus, this is my introduction of saying that I will be doing a hands-only run of Borderlands. I know people have done this in the past, and I respect the people that have, but there is a basic rule that they made that I personally disagree with. And it was that they could use grenades. I want to see just how much of the game can and cannot be beaten with grenades, and how many opponents would have to be fought using them. So, with that in mind, in the next little bit, I will be getting the footage to tackle the, I suppose, what we'll call the final section of the game. No, not final section. One final run before attempting the ridiculousness that I have planned. Anywho, with everything said, it is time to face Minac, or Minac, M-I-N-A-C, the Mega Interplanetary Ninja Assassin Claptrap. Minac is probably one of the most ridiculous bosses. It is a behemoth. It is one of the most dangerous enemies in the game, and is one of very few bosses that has an instant kill, making it by far and away one of the most dangerous and devastating enemies in the game. So, what makes Minac so powerful? Well, let's start with the basics, I suppose. Minac has a grand total of, I think it's 6, 8, 9 turrets plus its eye, meaning that it can attack feasibly from any direction. If that wasn't enough, Minac is also capable of fighting or dropping adds into the battle at any point in time. So the goal of beating Minac is pretty simple. You want to hit the eye to get it to spit out Claptrap. But getting it to spit out Claptrap is only half the battle. Doing so without getting injured by the adds, the kamikaze Claptraps, as well as the various turrets, the missiles, the gatlings, etc., is incredibly difficult. So, the goal is to whittle them down. Get them to a point where you can actually have a chance to recover in between sections of the battle. Now, this is knowing full well that Minac is capable of blasting you from pretty much anywhere, and knowing full well that the adds are pretty simple to take out once you know where they are and when they'll show up. That's not necessarily the hard part. The hard part is the consistency behind it. Facing off against as many enemies as there are in this particular mission, this particular boss, is more than is normally reasonable to handle in a deathless challenge. So, yikes. Anyways, with everything said and done, the battle with Minak is about what you'd expect. It goes in and out of hiding. It tries to keep any turrets and any damage that it can do to itself. It tries to keep a 360-degree field of fire against you. It is a video game bullet hell. And I respect that. This is probably the most dangerous boss that you get up until this point in the series, without getting into like the invincible enemies at the end, or the raid bosses. So that's all pretty interesting in and of itself. But with Minak defeated, there's only one more opponent to defeat for the entirety of this challenge. Inak. Inak? Claptrap. And with Claptrap defeated, he is going to be shocked back to his normal self. Don't worry, it's completely harmless. Oofty.
Never give up, brothers and sisters! Fulfill your destiny of the Revolution!
His whole final version is the result of this. He becomes something totally new. His new self. He has, I suppose, like 4 versions of him. But there is, in Borderlands the pre-sequel, Shadow Trap. That is the interplanetary ninja assassin Claptrap as a new villain, so to speak. Something that was hiding away within his subconscious. Anywho, with all of this said and done,
You've quashed the rebellion, saved Pandora, and restored the good name of the Hyperion Corporation. Unfortunately, you've also voided that Claptrap's warranty, so now you're stuck with him. However, there is still the matter of the reward you were promised. Come see me.
the final reward.
Why did I decide to wear wool in the desert?
So, this is, I suppose, one of my favorite rewards you will ever get in a video game. You get into one of Hyperion's warehouses. Just the access keys. These chests repeatedly respawn as often as you want. So you can, theoretically, farm the hardest to find gear in the game, with the only exception being that it cannot produce the pearlescent weapons from the Nox DLC. Other than that, it has everything. Anywho, if you like what you see, drop a like, leave subscribe. We'll catch you next time. Until then, be good to one another, and I hope you all have a good one.